Ethan Miller mastered the art of disappearing. He sat in the back of classrooms, spoke only when called on, and moved through the halls like a shadow. It wasn't shyness, it was survival. At Crestwood High, the weak didn't survive long in the spotlight, and Ethan, skinny with oversized glasses, had been marked as an easy target. "Hey, Four Eyes!" The voice boomed down the hallway. Ethan tightened his grip on his books. Blake Carter, captain of the basketball team, the school's golden boy, was grinning like he owned the world. He wasn't alone. A pack of teammates trailed behind, hungry for the laugh that always followed Blake's cruelty. Blake slapped the books from Ethan's hands, scattering papers across the floor. The crowd chuckled as Ethan dropped to his knees, scrambling to gather them. Laughter roared. Ethan didn't answer. He never did. Arguing only made it worse. But what no one noticed was the flicker of sharpness behind Ethan's silence. He wasn't dumb, nor was he weak in the way they thought. He just knew fights weren't won with fists. Later that day, Ethan sat in chemistry class, fiddling with his pencil while Mr. Lawson droned about safety procedures. His eyes drifted to the corner of the room where an outlet buzzed faintly, a thin spark jumping at the edge. Ethan frowned. He raised his hand. "Sir, I think that outlet—" "Later, Miller," the teacher cut him off. "We're on page 214. Ethan let his hand drop. No one listened to him, not even adults. But he couldn't shake the unease. He scribbled a note to himself in the margin of his notebook. Wiring by lab sparks danger. By lunch, the incident was forgotten. Ethan sat alone at his table, chewing slowly while Blake's laughter carried across the cafeteria. He watched the group of athletes crowd around, their energy filling the room. Ethan felt like he lived in a different world, one where he didn't matter, where his words held no weight. But deep inside, there was something stubborn. He wasn't going to spend his whole life in the shadows. He just didn't know yet how he'd step into the light. The first sign came that Friday afternoon. Ethan was in the library when the faint smell of smoke crept through the air. Most students didn't notice. He did. His nose wrinkled, his eyes narrowing as he glanced toward the vents. Something was wrong. The school bell rang and Ethan gathered his books, moving into the crowded hallway. That's when the fire alarm screamed to life sharp, shrill, echoing through the chaos. Students panicked instantly, surging toward the exits, shouting and pushing. Ethan tightened his grip on his bag, eyes darting. Through the haze, he saw flickers of orange deep in the corridor, flames licking at the edges of a classroom door. His chest tightened, and then he heard a voice shouting, desperate, drowned by the chaos. "Help, somebody." Ethan's stomach dropped. He knew that voice. It was Blake. The alarm screamed. Smoke twisted through the corridors like dark fingers. Students surged toward the exits in a frantic tide, shoving and crying out, the sound of fear louder than the alarm itself. Ethan tried to move with the crowd, his heart hammering in his chest, but then he heard it. "Help, somebody, help." He froze. That voice was too familiar. Blake Carter. Through the haze, Ethan spotted him pinned beneath a heavy ceiling beam, his leg trapped, the arrogant grin long gone. Blake's face was pale, streaked with sweat and soot, his eyes wide with terror. "Ethan?" Blake gasped when he saw him. "Get out of here. Don't just stand there, run." Ethan's instincts screamed at him to do just that. Run, escape. Let Blake feel the fear he had forced on others 100 times before. But Ethan's legs didn't move. He thought of his mother's words. The measure of a man is in what he does for others, even when they wouldn't do the same for him. Jaw tight, Ethan dropped his bag and ran toward the fire. The smoke burned his lungs as he pressed against the beam. It barely shifted. His arms trembled. Blake winced, his voice breaking. "Leave me. You'll die here." "No," Ethan choked out. His eyes darted until he spotted a bent metal rod near the lockers. He snatched it up, wedged it under the beam, and threw his whole weight onto it. The wood creaked, lifted just enough for Blake to drag his leg free. "Move!" Ethan grabbed Blake's arm, hauling him up. Blake staggered, limping heavily, leaning on him as they lurched toward the exit. The hallway was an inferno now. Flames raced across the ceiling tiles, smoke so thick it blinded them. Ethan guided them by sheer instinct, coughing violently. Overhead, something groaned. The roof. "Run," Ethan shouted, dragging Blake forward, as the ceiling behind them collapsed in a thunderous roar of sparks and fire. Heat slammed into their backs. They stumbled through the smoke, the faint glow of daylight ahead. Ethan's body screamed in protest, his lungs clawing for air, but he forced himself onward. One step, then another. Blake's weight threatened to pull him down, but he refused to let go. With a final, desperate lunge, they crashed through the doors into open air. Cool wind hit Ethan's face. Students screamed. Teachers rushed forward. Blake collapsed onto the grass, coughing hard. Ethan tried to breathe, but his chest felt tight, like iron bands were crushing his lungs. The world tilted. His vision blurred. He dropped to his knees, then fell face first onto the ground. "Ethan!" Someone screamed. "He's not moving. Call the paramedics, hurry." Blake crawled toward him, horror etched on his face. "Ethan, no, don't do this." His voice cracked, breaking in a way no one had ever heard before. The last thing Ethan felt was hands shaking him, voices shouting, and the cool grass beneath his cheek. Then everything went dark, and for a terrifying moment, everyone believed the school's most bullied kid had died. Chaos erupted the moment Ethan hit the ground. Students gasped, some screamed, and teachers sprinted toward him. The fire still roared inside the building, but for the crowd outside, all focus had shifted to the boy lying motionless on the grass. "Give him space," a teacher shouted, kneeling at his side. "Somebody get the paramedics now." Blake dragged himself closer, his injured leg dragging uselessly behind him. His face was streaked with soot and tears he didn't bother to hide. He reached for Ethan, his voice raw and shaking. "Come on, Miller. Wake up. Don't you dare leave me after what you just did." The paramedics arrived in seconds, dropping to their knees with oxygen tanks and medical bags. One checked Ethan's pulse while the other placed an oxygen mask over his mouth and nose. "He's breathing weakly. Let's stabilize him." The students pressed closer, whispering in shock. Ethan Miller, the kid everyone ignored, mocked, shoved aside, was lying there like a fallen soldier. Is he gonna die?" Someone whispered. "No way. He just saved Blake. He ran into the fire." "For him?" The words spread like sparks through dry grass. For once, Ethan wasn't invisible. He was the only thing anyone could see. Blake gripped Ethan's hand tightly, ignoring the paramedics trying to move him aside. His voice cracked as he muttered over and over, "Don't die, man. Please, you saved me. You're the only reason I'm out here." The principal, red-faced and shaken, crouched beside them. His usual commanding tone wavered as he looked at Ethan's limp body. "You brave, foolish boy. Hang on, just hang on." The paramedics lifted Ethan onto a stretcher, the oxygen mask fogging faintly with each shallow breath. One of them turned to the crowd. "He's critical. We need to get him to the hospital now." As they pushed the stretcher toward the ambulance, students stepped back in silence. Some bowed their heads. Others watched with wide, guilty eyes, remembering the times they had laughed at Ethan's expense. The sight of him, pale and fragile, being wheeled away, left a mark no one would forget. Blake, still on the ground, tried to stand but collapsed again, clutching his injured leg. He shouted hoarsely after the stretcher, "Ethan, you can't give up, you hear me? You're stronger than all of us." The ambulance doors slammed shut, sirens wailing as it sped away. For a long moment, the crowd stood frozen. The golden boy had been saved, but the outcast Crestwood, High's most bullied kid, was now fighting for his life, and no one knew if he would make it. The hospital waiting room was silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Students, teachers, and even the principal crowded the chairs, their faces pale with worry. News had spread like wildfire. Ethan Miller, the boy everyone overlooked, had saved Blake Carter's life. Hours crawled by. Every time the doors swung open, heads turned. Finally, a doctor appeared, his expression stern but steady. "He's alive," the doctor announced. A wave of relief washed over the room. Severe smoke inhalation, dehydration, and exhaustion. "He's weak, but he's a fighter." Ethan woke the next morning to a hospital room filled with sunlight and silence. For once, no laughter at his expense, no cruel voices mocking him. Just the soft beep of machines and the sound of the door opening. Blake limped in on crutches, his leg bandaged. His usual swagger was gone. He stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, his eyes downcast. "You're awake," he muttered. Ethan pulled the oxygen mask aside and gave a weak smile. "Sorry to disappoint." Blake flinched, his face flushing. "Don't joke, man. I thought you were gone. You could have left me there. Everyone else did. But you didn't." His voice cracked. "Why?" Ethan's eyes softened. "Because you're human, and humans deserve a chance. Even you." For the first time, Blake had no comeback, no smirk, just a long, heavy silence. Then he nodded. "I was wrong about you, about everything." The following week, the school gathered in the auditorium. The fire had destroyed half the gym, but Crestwood High had been spared from complete disaster. At the assembly, Principal Harris took the stage, calling Ethan forward. Murmurs filled the room as the boy who once sat, invisible in the back, walked slowly to the microphone. Before Ethan could speak, Blake hobbled forward on his crutches and took the mic. He scanned the room, his jaw tight. "I've been the biggest jerk in this school," he admitted. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "I picked on Ethan for years, made his life hell. But when it mattered most, he saved mine. Not the teachers, not the teammates, not me, the kid I bullied. He's the reason I'm standing here." He turned toward Ethan, his eyes glistening. "He's the real hero." The students rose to their feet, applause thundering through the room. Ethan stood frozen, overwhelmed. For the first time in his life, they weren't laughing at him. They were cheering for him. From that day on, Ethan was no longer just the boy in the shadows. He was proof that courage wasn't about popularity or strength, but about doing the right thing when it mattered most. And though the old Ethan, the invisible, bullied boy, had collapsed in those flames, something new had risen in his place. The most bullied kid died that day, and a hero was born. Like, share, and subscribe for more.